Hi team, hey, let's have a look at the trade wars that changed the world. Okay, this takes us a wee way back in time, all right? History doesn't repeat, but it does rhyme. Okay, let's have a look at the Wall of Trade, the Hall of Trade War Shame. Okay, part of what we're going to be looking at is something called a Smoot Hawley Tariff. All right, so we are going all the way back. Let's have a look in the 1930s. The US passed a law that helped turn a stock market crash into the Great Depression. 1971, President Nixon tore up the global monetary system on a Sunday night with no warning to anyone. In 2018, the US and China, 40% of the global GDP between them, started taxing each other's goods at levels nobody thought possible just 5 years earlier. Trade wars have shaped history more almost than any other economic force going. And we might be living through the biggest restructuring since 1945. This is Econ Teach NZ. We're going to be looking at 3 trade wars, what each one teaches us, and maybe look at some exam technique as well. All right, so let's have a look at the Smoot Hawley situation in the 1930s. Okay, let's think about US Congress. Let's look at global trade and how it collapsed. There was retaliation. It was like dominoes. Okay, the Smoot Hawley Tariff started as a promise to protect American farmers. It became one of the worst policy own goals in history. The logic sounded fine. Tax imports, protect domestic jobs. But what the politicians ignored was the idea of retaliation. Within months, Canada, Britain, France, Germany, they all hit back with their own tariffs. Sound familiar? Global trade collapsed by roughly 2/3 between the years of 1929 and 1934. We had banks failing, we had unemployment just exploding. The lesson isn't that tariffs are bad, it's about those second order effects. First order, protect one industry, but the second order, everyone retaliates, and the third order, global demand craters, and even the country that started it loses. Systems thinking every time. In 1971, there was the Nixon shock. All right, President Nixon, 15th of August 1971. He goes on television and announces that the US dollar was no longer convertible to gold. Effective immediately. No heads up to any of his allies. This was the official end of the Bretton Woods system, the system set up from 1944 where the currencies were pegged to the dollar and the dollar was pegged to gold. It was pegged there at around $35 US an ounce. Why did they do that? The US had been spending more abroad than it earned. Foreign governments were cashing their dollars in for gold. Sound familiar? And the gold in this case was running out. Nixon's options were to look at perhaps crushing the US economy or maybe changing the rules. So he changed the rules. The result was the floating exchange rates, the currency chaos, and an oil crisis as exporters all paid in those US dollars and they were suddenly cheaper. All the prices jacked right up. The lesson, systems that make trade possible aren't laws of nature. They're political deals, and one powerful actor can rip them up in a single TV address. What about US and China and their trade wars, right? From 2018 until basically now, right? Look at the container ships, tariff escalations. Think about the semiconductor industry, all right? Now, this is a situation that will affect us all continuing a little bit into the next few years. The US-China trade war is different in one crucial way. It's not really about economics. It's about technology, security, and who runs the 21st century. The surface story is tariff, hundreds of billions of dollars worth of goods, with China retaliating, particularly US soybeans and pork. But a deeper story is about semiconductors. the US decided that they would let China maybe dominate in that particular industry. Advanced chips, they were seen as a national security risk. Modern weapons, AI, infrastructure, all of that was run on those. So in 2022, the US produced a CHIPS Act. It was tens of billions of dollars in subsidies. That was the response to this trade situation. This was a new kind of trade policy, restructuring supply chains, but for strategic reasons. We had friendshoring, right? We were supporting countries that we trusted and maybe decoupling from those we don't. Comparative advantage also breaks here because Ricardo never imagined that your trading partner might actually be a rival. So what is your exam angle? Both IB and IGCSE. All three of those cover the costs of protectionism, impacts on exchange rates and the exchange rate systems, and the role of government in trade. All of the core IB and IGCSE territory look at evaluating the case for protectionist policies. Well, think about that Smoot Hawley situation. That's killer evidence. What about managed versus floating rates? Think about President Nixon. All right, that was a real-world story behind the textbook. The sophistication involves separating out the economic protectionism from maybe strategic decoupling. They look identical but aren't. Trade wars aren't won. Just to let this be known, trade wars are not won. They are survived, usually by the bigger, less trade-dependent economy. But the world after a trade war is always poorer than it would have been. The real debate economists are split on is the non-economic reasons. Security, sovereignty. Is it worth paying that particular price for? This is Econ Teach NZ. I'd like you to comment. Was the Smoot Hawley tariff deal the biggest trade mistake in history? Or does something more recent take that crown? Please like, comment, subscribe. Next, who actually wins from free trade? The answer is, yeah, it's going to be more uncomfortable than either side are going to admit. All right? Who actually wins from free trade? Hint, it's complicated. All right, we've had a look at the biggest trade policy mistakes in history, but what about you? Make an economic case for your thoughts about trade. Otherwise, like, comment, subscribe, and we'll see you next time. Hei kōrero, have a good day.